today I will be moderating this session.
제주 연구원 김시우 연구원입니다.
So one of the topics discussed globally nowadays is that
전
climate change
세계적으로
is an
요즘
existential
많이
issue
다루고
for
있는 주제 중에
young generations, and
기후
thus
위기가
voice from the young
그래서 오늘
must be
기후 위기에
heard. Since
따른
last
청년의
April,
역할에 대해서
Germany's highest court has
말씀드리겠습니다.
ruled that German climate legislation are unconstitutional because they place too much of a burden for younger generations, calling the current provisions incompatible with fundamental rights. So today we're going to deal with this kind of issues, and we're going to talk about what young actors have been doing, and we're going to listen what they have to say as young generations in regards to climate crisis. So we have excellent topics today, not only fixated on the climate, but also from oceans to forests and such. So without further ado, let me introduce our panelists of our today's session. We have Mr. Kang Ho-young, a chairman of the board at Jeju Badang Incorporated Association. And we have Ms. Tong Hui-chao, a master's candidate at KAIST Graduate School of Green Growth. And we have Mr. Jack BATHE, a researcher at Coalition for Our Common Future. And lastly, but not least, we have Mr. Kim Hong-jin, a researcher at Jeju Research Institute. So for presenters, I would like to give you as much time as you need, but please keep in mind that because of the time constraint of our session, please keep the presentation within 10 to 12 minutes. And for audiences, if you have any questions for any of our panelists, please hold them. They will be answered during the Q&A time at the end. So now the floor is yours, Mr. Kang. 네, 대표님 발표해 주시면 됩니다.
Mr. Kang, please go ahead. Doesn't matter. You can just stand up or you can sit down. Doesn't matter.
안녕하세요.
Good morning. I am Kang Ho-young, board chair of the Jeju Badang Incorporated Association. Today, I would like to talk about the preservation of Jeju's sustainable marine ecosystem and the role of the youth. So, to briefly introduce you to Jeju Badang, Jeju Badang Incorporated Association is a non-profit entity established to organize and support volunteers in collecting and reducing marine litter. The questions that I take frequently is, what is marine waste or marine litter? Anyone with simple explanation? Marine litter refers to human-created waste that has been released into a sea or ocean or washed away to the ocean. So if it's on land, it's land waste. If it's in the sea, it's marine waste. After all, they are waste that we created. As you can see from the table, waste coming from the land far outweighs waste generated by fishing activities. These are the pictures of marine litter that we collected with our volunteers from Jeju's ocean. So how do they strike you? When it comes to marine litter, many of you oftentimes think that it is a country of a faraway country, or it is a problem that does not matter to you. But after this presentation, you might be surprised that you can see marine waste quite often. As you can see, the amount of marine waste is only growing, and this graph only shows the waste collected by the local authorities, and we don't know how much waste is still out there not collected. Rough estimation is that in Jeju, 20,000 tons of marine litter is put into the sea every year, and these uncollected waste causes a lot of problem. When it comes to marine waste, this is the typical picture you can imagine. You can see the marine tortoise is swimming, being trapped in fishnet. But this is something that you cannot readily actually see in our everyday life. So we oftentimes believe that this is not our problem. But please take a look at this video clip. We have already shown you that under the Sea of Jeju, it's filled with household garbage and abandoned fishing gear. The situation is quite similar even 40 minutes beneath the surface. We could see fish and soft coral dead tangled by abandoned net. Seongdong Park has the story. In the coastal waters of Seopsum Island, a natural monument, divers actually find abandoned net stretching widely instead of the beautiful scenes that they are supposed to see. Fish and soft coral, which is an endangered species, are dying caught in the net. Fish, flatfish, rockfish, some of the fish in the net were already half rotten, tangled by the net. Long lines that have been used in the fishing boats were twining around the rocks, and divers struggled to untangle them. After 2 hours of work, they could collect about 100 kilos of discarded fishing nets and lines, and these not only pollute water but also affect marine life as well. When wound up by abandoned nets, marine animals cannot eat and eventually die and become the source of pollution. Discarded fishing gears are bulky and hard to collect, and even professional divers find it difficult to collect them back. You have to cut them one by one to collect, and I think they're quite huge, like 70 or 80 meters long. While fishing boats and fishermen just casually throw away fishing nets and gears that they cannot use anymore, the marine ecosystem of Jeju is dying slowly. So these are the frequent stories that we often hear in diverse media channels, in vacation times, in tourism seasons. You hear these kind of news. But actually, this is not a news only from the peak season. It is a all year round issue. Today, I would like to tell you why I am doing this activity to solve this marine litter problem. Why do you do this is the question I get quite often. I'm not an environmental activist, I have to say. Then why I am standing here and why I am doing this work? I was just an ordinary office worker. I was born in an urban city and worked in a restaurant franchise business. My job was to support franchisees. And just like other people do, one day I took a trip to Jeju to have a short getaway, basically. And during my trip, I could witness that marine litter and marine waste is everywhere. I could see that the coastal waters and the coastal areas were filled with the waste and garbage. And when I got back, I couldn't help thinking of neglected garbage on the beach, not the beautiful sceneries that I originally wanted to see. Trying to figure out what I can do and trying to figure out reasons why people don't care, I just decided to come to visit and come to Jeju. And under the name of Jeju Badang Incorporated Association, I do activities to clean up marine waste along with many volunteers. And this leads me to ask this question: what can the youth do to help preserve the marine ecosystem? Actually, nothing. Nothing if working individually. If alone, nothing can be done. Picking up waste is a good thing, but it is a small deed. We need a lot of people's participation to actually address this issue. If working alone, we cannot fix this, but if working together with those people who share the same value, and if we share knowledge, I think we can do much more to solve this problem. We think a lot about environment, but actually we just think and do nothing. We just stop there. However, we have to do something. But then, picking up leaders individually or alone cannot fix this problem. But if we just invite more and more people and enlarge the pool of people who follow the same cause, maybe we can get closer to fixing the problem. What I'm trying to say is that we have to start working on it, acting on your concern, along with the people who share the same concerns. The youth can start thinking about all these issues, and the youth can share this info with people around them. And I hope that we do not stop at sharing and start acting. I think that is the very first step that the youth can take. That is it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kang, for the meaningful message in your presentation. I think Mr. Kang has delivered us a very important message for younger generations that we should stop having climate or waste NIMBYism, and it is now our time to act. And he showed now or never spirit to us. Thank you again. And now, as problematic and important as oceanic waste in Earth's ecosystem and climate crisis is the forestry. And our next speaker, Tong-hee, or in Korean name, Dong-hae, she told me the other day, she will share her stories and insights on afforestation in China. Now the floor is yours, Dong-hee.
Thank you, Shiwoo, and let me first share my slides with you. Okay, so hopefully you can see it right now. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tong-hui, as Shiwoo just introduced, and I am currently studying at the School of Green Growth in KAIST. Today, I would like to share with you some progress on afforestation in China and Chinese youth role in it. Let me first introduce you to this picture that was widely spread on social media this spring. Now, you might think that this is just a very common thing to see in Beijing in springtime, but to be honest with you, it's been over 20 years since I last saw something like this. It used to be part of my childhood memories, but the extreme climate this year has brought those memories back into reality. So when this serious sandstorm hit, I was just beginning my study at KAIST online here from Beijing, but I felt frustrated to see a natural disaster like this, while at the same time, I felt more anticipated about the future where I could make a contribution to my country in tackling environmental challenges after my study. However, the environmental problem is just one of the many problems troubling our society currently. Here in China, there are still worries about if COVID cases is going to spike in the winter or how the slowing down of the economy will be dealt with. Yet, with so many social problems to be addressed, young people today feel more powerless than ever before. Recently, a very popular phrase is called Tangping, or the lying flat movement. Young people joke about how lying flat will effectively prevent themselves from being hurt by the cold reality in the modern society out there. Now, it is, of course, a very unfortunate trend of young people feeling powerless and unwilling to make any efforts to positively take on daily challenges. And this is becoming a very common phenomenon globally, similar with the Great Resignation in the US and the Give Up generation in South Korea. Not only does the lying flat movement brings a warning bell for our society, it poses an immediate problem that we have no time to lose and we cannot bear the cost of leaving any generations behind. So there is a saying in China addressing the importance of the need for long-term effort and education. If your plan is for 1 year, plant rice. If your plan is for 10 years, plant trees. And if your plan is for 100 years, educate children. Now, to educate a generation of people is a long-term project, and it is also true with saving our planet Earth. So what if we can achieve these two goals together at the same time? That's why I would like to proceed my topic by going into 3 examples addressing the mobilization of youth power, the redefinition of their roles, and what new exciting trends are ahead of us in the field of afforestation. So the first example I'm introducing you today is about how young Chinese people are trying to utilize the digital technology to promote climate actions. And the project's name is called Ant Forest. So you might have heard of this if you're interested in afforestation issues, because Ant Forest has won the Champion of the Earth Award of the UNEP in 2019. Ant Forest is one of the features of Alipay, which is like the Kakao Pay in South Korea. It tracks your consumption records, and once an eco-friendly action is completed, such as taking public transportation or purchasing second-hand products, you will receive a certain amount of green energy, which is about equivalent to the emission that your action has saved. And when they reach a certain amount, you can choose to plant a tree or donate those energies in the form of funding to natural reserves. Now, something special about these online green users, 60% of them are below the age of 28. So I think there are 2 reasons why I see it as a perfect example of mobilizing young people's power. So first of all, to address the problem of lack of motivation, the feature provides updated visual images and allow users to be clearly informed of the change that they're making. The importance of this is that young people need to see how accumulating small daily efforts turns into part of a grand project. Now, you can see that your small daily efforts are doing good for our Mother Earth, and the change can be visible and tangible as long as we keep on reducing our carbon footprint in normal daily life. The second feature that made it so popular is the network that allow users to enhance their friendships and expand networking while making afforestation contributions. The function that allows people to do so is called stealing energies. So every early morning, you can steal energies from your friends if they themselves and no one else have collected them. And some even set very early morning alarms just to collect each other's energies. Besides, you can also check your friends' tree planting certificates and the ranking of the green energies that they got. On the right are 3 of my own certificates, and they tell you where your trees are and which organization is in charge of planting them. So one of my friends on the top of the ranking has acquired 37 certificates, which means that he now has 37 trees standing on the border of the desert in China. Now, the ant forest is a perfect example of how young people can be motivated and mobilized to get involved in long-term, arduous projects like growing trees in the desert. It is also a lesson for us that small efforts in daily life can make a big difference with the help of innovative ideas and social entrepreneurship. So far, over 550 million ant forest users have planted over 200 million virtual trees on mobile phone, and the physical trees planted cover an area equivalent to 2.5 times the surface area of Singapore. The carbon emission offset this project has generated is also quite significant. But I think what young people can do is more than just being supportive benefit receivers. We can take on leading roles as givers back to our society. Now, if ant forest sounded like a child's play, what I'm introducing next is more about young generation's long-term commitment in afforestation and turning planting trees into their lifelong career. This summer, during a trip to Shanxi province, I discovered one of the best ways to eat pears, and that is to slice them and marinate them in the juice of a kind of fruit called the sea berry. So sea berry is a plant that grows in very dry area near the desert, and it is usually planted to inhibit soil erosion. Growing sea berry is more than reversing desertification trend. It is also about bringing significant economic benefits. This young man right here is one of what we call the small town youngsters who decided to establish his own career while helping his hometown. His name is He Weifeng. He used to be a civil servant in Beijing after graduation. But his hometown Kelan is a very poor mountain village in Shanxi province. Agriculture is the main source of income there, but the arid and mountainous land was too fragile to support the livelihoods of the village. So in 2017, at the age of 33, he decided to go back to his hometown in Kelan and grow sea berry there. Not only can sea berry be made into juice, the seeds of it can be made into oil that is worth over $400 per kilo. The business became very successful, and with the help of Wei Feng's company, the local farmers have more than doubled their income from growing and selling sea berry. While planting sea berry to bring some green color back to the barren homeland, Wei Feng also moved the entire sea berry plantation, nurturing, processing, and sales industry to Kelan and helped to create more than 3,000 jobs there. Now, the saying, mountains and rivers green are mountains of silver and gold, is probably a must mention whenever one is introduced to green policies in China, but it is indeed a truth, at least in Wei Feng's story. For all the young leaders here today, and for those who have the same dreams out there, the wave of green growth mine has presented us with the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to build a career in afforestation that's good for the earth and for the less privileged. Now, one exciting news for those hot pot lovers out there, the Ant Forest has collaborated with Haidilao, which is a very famous Chinese hot pot brand name, in developing this new product of hot pot soup that's made of sea berry juice. So for every hot pot sold, Haidilao will donate money for Ant Forest to grow a tree in the desert. I have not yet tried this new product yet, but I think it should be very delicious just by looking at these two pictures. Now, let's look into the future of afforestation. Some Chinese provinces that are rich in forestry resources have been using carbon sink as sources for financing and carbon offset sources. Now, with the new national ETS in place, many local governments are looking forward to fully utilizing their forestry resource to create jobs and new sources of income for farmers and villagers. According to one estimation, over 7 million tons of carbon sink are needed, which far exceeds the current existing amount. So that means there is more potential in the area of afforestation for young people to make your unique contributions. So if I were to give anyone of my age some encouraging words, I would show him this Chinese character for a big forest, which consists of 3 of the characters for a single tree. Now, the same is true with your action. Ant Forest relies on saving even just grams of CO2 emissions in your daily life. And Wei Feng had no idea that the small fruit of sea berry can lift his hometown out of poverty. Even if your dream is not that big, you can always begin with something you like, given it hot pot or kimchi jjigae. From a trivial action today, find your passion into a more sustainable future. Last message, if you have a plan for 10 years, the best time to start planting your tree of hope is right now. Thank you very much for your listening.
Thank you so much, Tong-hui, for the wonderful presentation and your insights on the afforestation in China. So Tong-hui's presentation has, I think, 3 folds. One is the mobilization of youth through digital empowerment, such as by Ant Forest. And second, she redefined the role of youth. And third, she introduced the growing demand in forestry as a carbon sink, as well as the emphasis on the collaboration. So what really stood out to me from Tong-hui's talking points was that she defines the youth not as supporting roles, but as leading roles, not as passive receivers, but as active contributors. That was really moving and inspiring to me. And so we have heard specific cases from oceanic waste to forest, and their presenters' insights in regards to those specific cases. Because our ecosystem is highly intertwined, oceanic waste and afforestation has clearly a massive impact on the climate crisis. So So now we're going to talk more about macroscopic issues regarding climate crisis. Our next speaker, Jack, is from the United Kingdom, where 26th Glasgow Climate Change Conference of Parties is being hosted. And he will share some of the insights from the COP26, and also he will talk about carbon pricing. The floor is yours now, Jack.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much to you for that kind introduction. And hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's really a pleasure to be talking with you all this morning. And honestly, it's wonderful to see so many of these types of events at which the youth and their representatives are given an opportunity to speak. Certainly, we've come a long way in achieving greater levels of youth engagement and action in combating the climate crisis. And there are plenty of exciting initiatives taking place all around us, many of which my colleagues here today are involved in, and some of which have been and will be delivered to you here. However, I'm not going to be doing that today. Instead, I want to start by talking to you about something which has really plagued my thoughts recently, and which I think to be quite dangerous if we're not sufficiently vigilant. And it's not a new problem. Actually, it might well be one of the oldest issues humanity has faced. Yet at this critical juncture, where judiciousness is of the highest importance, we must be mindful of this more than anything else. And that problem is of empty words, promises without foundation, or what Greta might call blah, blah, blah. There are two very popular concepts within the political climate change space currently, and both of them are potentially dangerous, and both of them feed into each other. And those ideas are of youth leadership in climate change action and carbon neutrality by 2040, 2050, 2060, whenever that may be. But first, let me clarify by saying that youth leadership itself is not dangerous, actually quite the opposite. But the danger lies in this dual phase kicking of the buck or passing of the buck by current leaders. Not only are we setting these climate targets which are far into the future and to which current leaders cannot be held accountable, but the recent dialogue around the stakes of climate change for the youth and the importance of the youth to act as leaders serves little more than to further disassociate our global leaders and corporations from any semblance of responsibility. So, as you're all aware, COP26 has been taking place over the past couple of weeks and has highlighted once again how difficult climate negotiations are at the highest level and how they're consistently failing to make progress at the speed required. And certainly we would deem many of the decisions made to not be in the interests of the youth who global leaders so frequently claim to respect. Now, if any of those leaders happen to be watching by some miracle, and particularly those in some of the most developed economies, if you'd like to write to me and detail exactly how the decision to refuse to phase out coal power plants is made out of respect for the youth and future generations, then I implore you to contact the organizers of this event and they'll be more than happy to share those contact details with you. Now, when we think about these decisions, could they have been altered by arguments from youth leaders? I would say the reality is no. Then what does it mean to be a youth leader? What agency does that position carry with it? Or more importantly, what agency could that position potentially carry when the powers and resources to affect change are afforded to it? The youth narrative is very inspiring, and former President of the United States, Barack Obama, earlier this week dedicated a considerable portion of his speech at COP26 to directly address the youth and remind them of their important role. Obama highlighted the successes of notable youth leaders around the world who had proven their mettle and had an impact. He noted that the youth have to change the minds of those in power now, the older generations, or have those individuals move aside. But what he really failed to note was how those with the power and resources to support the youth can do so now in more effective ways, and what cross-generational partnerships can be constructed. And to be honest, I was disappointed by the absence of this. And in the context of what I've been talking about so far, I'm sure you can understand why. This way of thinking, that the emphasis is very much on the youth to battle through the barriers set up by leaders of corporations and governments, is irresponsible. Just as when one is faced by a locked door, it's much easier for the person residing behind it to unlock the door rather than to kick it down yourself. The resources which could be made available for educating a climate-savvy youth and supporting youth leadership projects are tied up elsewhere, and often they're used in areas which contradict this youth-supporting narrative. In the UK, for example, between 2017 and 2019, the government supported fossil fuel industries to the tune of $16.4 billion per year on average. And that's according to the International Institute for Sustainable Development. And one must possess very little imagination to begin to think of what even a fraction of that could achieve if diverted to youth projects instead. Now, this is what is needed. This is what our leaders must do. But not only that, they must also open up pathways for youth representation within the government at the highest level, and this is becoming more of a necessity. As the Global Carbon Budget Report this year highlighted, we have but 11 years to make the changes needed to avoid the worst effects of climate change. So waiting for the youth to build initiatives from the ground up by themselves is becoming less of an option. Considerable resources must be channeled to the youth projects. Youth must be elevated to power by those with the ability to do so, and agreements pursuant of the conditions beneficial to this cause must be made now. As Hugh mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about climate carbon pricing, and one such agreement which must be reached is that regarding Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. The clarification of ambiguities around carbon credits and carbon markets is absolutely necessary if we are to have our industries move with speed towards carbon neutrality, and if we are determined to put an effective price on emissions. It's rare that such an era-defining decision is so obviously on the way, and much of the youth cohort is paying keen attention to carbon pricing and carbon markets. Emissions trading systems are being deployed more widely, and this year China launched its national emissions trading system to become the single largest regulated market for emissions trading in the world. Simultaneously, the European Union's carbon border adjustment mechanism is prepared for operational deployment in 2026, and the levy placed on European importers as a result of this mechanism will make it increasingly difficult for the way carbon is priced to be ignored. The creation of emissions-related markets, mechanisms, and so forth are still very much in development, and we don't have a rich historical context on which to base our decisions. And I believe this is one frontier at which the youth can have their impact felt the most. So it's for this reason that I've been working recently to assist Vladislav Arnodov. He's a senior specialist in quality assurance and monitoring and evaluation at the Green Climate Fund. And I've been assisting him in his writing of a textbook on carbon markets. The dissemination of this type of information to the youth, who can use their energy and creativity, channel it to make more effective designs and mechanisms, who can place ever increasing pressure on their governments and companies to be more ambitious when engaging with these markets and mechanisms, and who must ultimately engage with these ideas as those which form the backdrop to our larger fight against climate crisis. Dedicating some resources to making some members of the youth experts and leaders in this emerging field will be invaluable to the operations of governments and companies alike. And failure to provide the youth with every opportunity to do so should be viewed as nothing less than shameful. I really want to make it clear to any of the older generations that are listening and who might be resolved to resist this change that there are partnerships to be had. Investments in youth leaders and initiatives are a requirement for a prosperous future in which the suffering of untold hundreds of millions is minimized. But it can be extremely difficult to empathize with those removed from us geographically or temporally, particularly those that are yet to exist, but who will ultimately bear the burden of the decisions we're making now. So to close, I want to leave you with this. In his presentation on the future of reasoning, an American educator called Michael Stevens discusses a theory known as the Fermi paradox, which questions why in the great age and expanse of the universe, life and civilization does not appear to exist anywhere else but Earth. One proposed response to this paradox is a concept known as great filters, which are challenges so difficult to overcome that few, if any, civilizations successfully do so. And in the context of climate change and the geographical and temporal barriers disconnecting us from those suffering the consequences, Stevens says the following: this may be one of the first challenges advancing civilizations face, wielding not just the power of technology, but also the responsibilities. Whether or not a species can extend their empathy might just be a great filter. So a final message to you would be, let's recover some of that empathy that we've lost, make the right decisions because we have to and because we should, and believe in and support the youth alongside those with the power now to make the changes a reality. And as Sir David Attenborough poignantly said just over 1 week ago, if we're working apart, we are a force powerful enough to destabilize our planet. Surely working together, we're powerful enough to save it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jack, for your insightful presentation. And I think Jack has tapped the core issue of the role of the youth thing in this climate crisis era, thorny but necessary issue that in his talking points, he said, youth need those who are in power now with every increasing platforms to make their voices heard and pathways to enact change. So he tapped this core issue of that. And thank you for the insight. And we're going to have more discussion afterwards. And so now, before we talk more, we have our last but not least, actually one of my colleagues, Mr. Kim Hong-jin, a researcher at Jeju Research Institute, and he's going to, he just flew back from Glasgow to share, as one of the delegations for Jeju, he's going to share insights from the COP26, as well as his hands-on experience working with the World Bank about Jeju's case. So now the floor is yours, Hong-jin.
Thank you very kindly, Xiu, and thank you organizers for this wonderful event. I really like the name, the Asia Pacific Young Leaders Forum, because I was part of a project that specifically designs how we can increase and enhance partnerships within this particular area. And obviously that doesn't mean that our partnership cannot expand to North America, South America, Europe, Africa. But nonetheless, I'm truly honored. And let me just begin by saying, yes, Jack, I share your anger, and I will do my best to make something out of your anger. as mentioned before, Jack and I have been close partners in preparing a report that specifically concerns renewable energy expansion and battery energy storage system expansion in our fight against the climate crisis. First, I'll discuss that, and then I'll move on to talk about my short experience in COP26 Glasgow. So the report I was talking about is called Battery Energy Storage System Development in the Pacific Island Countries. And the reason I really like this project is because it shares the experience of a decade-long project of Jeju. Jeju's carbon-free island 2030 aims for 100% renewable energy and electric vehicle expansion by 2030. And it is very highlighting, and it feels good that what's happening here in Jeju can be expanded to our neighboring countries in the Pacifics. So this report consisted of an in-depth policy, market, and financial research, followed by a statistical analysis of the energy and battery systems, and a roadmap design for our Pacific Island countries. But I'm not here to just talk about the outcomes of the report. The real highlight that I want to point out is the governance structure, which I will after I share with you the findings. So please keep in mind that it's not just about the results of this report, but as it is more so who participated. And I think that point will be of the highest relevance to this forum. So it took 1 year, and it was published just last month. And, excuse me. So the findings are fourfold, but obviously here I just want to emphasize the third point, because this forum is taking place here at Jeju. So we explored 2 cases of Jeju, Korea, and we explored cases of Jeju's main power grid, and Gapado's mini grid. We used a generalized method of moments to estimate the relationship among multiple parameters, in this case renewable energy and battery storage system, in statistical models. And we are able now to say with numerical evidence that the importance of battery energy storage system for expanded renewable generation is uncontested for the following reasons shown in the slide. And one of the really exhilarating finding that I was able to feel when conducting this research was there really isn't any place for coal or fossil fuels or diesels. As I was reading the outcomes of the modeling, it felt really good to know that renewables and battery energy storage will be the future. And when I say battery energy storage, obviously battery energy storage is just one technology out of the many supporting technologies that can support renewable integration in the grid. But nonetheless, if you see to the top right here, we have numerically proven that there's no statistical significance between fossil fuels and battery, meaning, and it's kind of a proclamation to our elders who are in control of investment criteria, just do not invest in fossil fuels. Why the will you, right? Sorry about my vulgar language. Invest in solar, invest in wind. It has a much higher efficiency, and it combines so well with battery energy storage systems. A similar result was found in the GAPA mini grid. Obviously, we have more information here because of the granularity of the raw data we received. And the findings are, again, as I mentioned, very hopeful. Variable renewable energy sources are likely to be not only at the center of only PICs, but also in North America, South America, Europe, Africa. And I think it's a responsibility of Jeju as one of the core islands in Korea in terms of renewable energy expansion to share its experience with developing nations or even developed nations for that matter. So we were able to address the issue of curtailment, which will sort of haunt the electric grid in Jeju for the upcoming years. And now to my main point. I would like for all of you to see the governance of the principal research team and our external supporting researchers. I'm confident and I am very proud to announce here that the core research team, the eldest of this core research team is aged 31. And can you guess who that is? Obviously, I'm the oldest one here. So you could characterize me as a slightly older young adult. I don't know if that makes sense, but my point is to the right down box, to the box in the right down, bottom right. Our senior advisor groups are the elders of our organization, and they have been of immense help supporting us. But then again, the point I want to emphasize is that because of their support, we, the young, were able to successfully conduct a very important research that can be replicated across the globe. Now on to the lessons from COP26. Obviously, I prepared this presentation material before I flew over to Glasgow. And the picture you see here is that of the pre-COP in Milan. And over 400 youth have gathered to discuss and draw up a resolution about the youth driving ambition, sustainable recovery, non-state actors engagement, and climate-conscious society. Obviously, they have drafted a very solid resolution to be delivered to the UN Secretary General. Unfortunately, the determination of the youth and their determination written in words haven't been reflected in the final draft of the COP26, or so as I am hearing. But nonetheless, I think it was a very solid program, the pre-COP, because it is now an official UNFCCC-sponsored event, and I believe that beginning with this COP and the next COP in Egypt and the following one in UAE, we'll also have an official youth session. Now, I want to emphasize the third point, the non-state actors engagement, because that is what I felt very closely of my part as a youth at COP. So obviously, when we say actors here, they mean national government, right? Or non-state actors here, in this case, would be municipality of Jeju, or Washington State, or the state of Bavaria, or even myself. I'm a non-state actor. And my role in COP26 was that of a learning experience. And it was very hectic, to be honest. I really thought my legs would chop out with all the moving I've been doing. But because of the opportunity that the former Governor Won Hee-ryong of Jeju and his partnership with Governor Inslee of Washington State, because of that opportunity, because of them allowing me to participate in that event, I was able to meet a lot of like-minded youth. For instance, climate advisors for governors, for cities, or even activists in the streets. And I think it was a very good opportunity for me to know that there are hundreds, maybe thousands, hopefully millions of youth out there trying to fight this crisis. Excuse me. So the message for the Asia Pacific Young Leaders Forum would be the following. So when I observe young people from the perspective of a young person, the young are absolutely concerned. No, cross that out. They're absolutely terrified about the climate crisis. And we are on a very different level in terms of our fear of the climate crisis, as Jack so eloquently had put it out, of this crisis. And because of that terror that might haunt us one day, we are able to gather information at a very quick pace to learn how we can combat this. And we are able to communicate this very freely across the globe using the internet and with less prejudice. So my suggestions for both the elders and the young would be, elders, give the young an opportunity to excel. Give them a chance to fight this. If you're advised by the information that we gather and the information that we communicate within us, you'll really have an impactful contribution to make and perhaps leave your footmark in the history books. So like the Coalition of Our Common Future and like the pre-COP Milan, create a platform wherein the young can play to combat the climate crisis. And Jack, I share your anger, so let's do much more, much faster. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hong-jin, for insightful presentation. So Hong-jin talked about the role of youth in terms of from the COP26, and he also shared experience working with the World Bank, a research study on the battery energy storage system and variable renewable energy integration with two specific cases of Jeju, mainly driven by young generation with the help of seniors. So thank you for your insights. And so we have about 70 minutes left. So I have so many questions to ask, but given the time constraints, I'm going to ask a key question that audiences would wonder. And then there is a question came up from one of the online participants. This will be answered after we have a little chat with the presentation and issues. So I will start with Mr. Kang. So 대표님과는 한국어로 조금 대화를.
With Mr. Kang, I would like to talk in Korean. I hope that's okay. So about the Jeju Badang, the presentation was wonderful. Thank you. What I feel is this about climate change and the marine litter and wastes. To solve these issues, we need to do something from regulatory perspective, of course, but sometimes it feels like we have to create a business model because we need private sector's participation to actively solve these issues. But then, as for the Jeju Badang Incorporated Association, it is a social corporation. So to those of young people out there who want to do social enterprises, as a person who already have done so, any piece of advice or recommendations? Thank you. As you pointed out, climate change, marine wastes are in the same line. I think I should begin by saying this. These activities matter, but so far we have led volunteers take care of these issues. The public organizations, the governments have been recklessly developing all their projects and neglected all the side effects, and that is why we have such a big issue currently facing us. But then, be it government or be it companies, they should start working to strengthen the regulations so that we can prevent the occurrence of these problems in the first place. And as for us, we started out as a non-profit entity and we are now transforming ourselves into a social enterprise, because as a non-profit organization, we only have to rely on donation for operation. We create revenue through services and products, and we need some funding channels to maintain our operation. As for social enterprise, I think all the people who want to solve these issues with these types of activities can be called social entrepreneurs, and I think there are a lot of youth out there who are already interested in these fields. And to be clear, creating business and running a business is definitely not an easy job. You might suffer and you might fail, but if you do have a concern that you want to tackle, I recommend that you take your time to study it, and I recommend you start first, not worrying about failure. I cannot guarantee that you'll 100% success or succeed. However, even after failure, I think you will 100% get a better perspective or get a better understanding about the issue that that you wanted to solve, and listening to other advices, you will definitely build back better after the initial failure. I want to say that finding connectivity and network among the people who you share your interests with would be a good way to go. Thank you. Mr. Kang have given advice to would-be social entrepreneurs, young social entrepreneurs. Since it is an environmental problem that we are trying to solve, we have to think about regulation and we have to think about diverse stakeholders that are in the ecosystem. And he mentioned that we have to think about all these diverse stakeholders and the needs of networking as well. Thank you.
Moving to Tong. So China has been one of the leading countries in climate action, including the leading clean technologies and such high penetration rates of electric vehicles, and especially in youth climate action, from ant forest to stories of small town youngsters that you have addressed in your presentation. So my question is, what could Korea and especially young generations in Korea could learn from China's bold and outpacing climate action?
Thank you for that question, Shiwoo. Although I don't think I'm in the right position to give anyone suggestions, I do have some thoughts to share with you on this issue. So I think there is lots of similarity between the East Asian countries nowadays. The high speed of economic growth is kind of slowing down. Although the economy is in transition, there hasn't been enough opportunities shown to the young generation. So my two own thoughts are, first of all, I think the young people should consider the potential and the possibility of crossovers. So for example, the ant forest is not an idea of some ecologists or environmental activists. It was this idea from some programmers. So the story was these programmers were just asked by their boss to create something out of green finance products. And so they had this idea that maybe they can create something that can both improve the afforestation situation in China, which is obviously a very important issue, and also to cultivate some eco-friendly consuming behaviors. So that's why they came up with this idea. So my suggestion is that if your major or your past experience has not been particularly relevant, you can still think about what you can do first and then try to align it with what you want to achieve. Also, the society needs to be more tolerant of alternatives. Do consider the potentials of young people before judging them by their degrees, past experiences, or any fixed stereotypes, because we are entering into a new model of development. So I believe you will never know where you can find some pure gold. The next suggestion I have is that we should find the right problem to address. So in terms of climate actions, there are millions of topics out there, and each country would have their own agendas and challenges. So for example, I remember having watched this Korean TV show hosted by Baek Jong-won, and who visited this farm in the rural area of Korea and advocated the citizens to purchase some so-called ugly vegetables that are perfectly to be eaten but are thrown away because of their imperfect appearance. So maybe sustainable agriculture or reducing food waste is more relevant to Korea than afforestation. So the key point here is that you need to identify the problems that are most close to your hometown and find solutions that are not simply adopted from somewhere else, but can be adapted to your local situation. So these are the two thoughts that I have to share with you.
Thank you, Tong-hui. So she talked about the integration of your background with the appropriate and relevant environmental problem. So we don't have really time now, so I will straight move to Jack. So you, as I mentioned earlier, you tapped really core issue of the role of youth in this climate crisis era. I think what you said is kind of related to the equity issues between generations, pushing youth to deal with the climate change because we become the main stakeholder in the climate crisis era. When we become the main stakeholder by the time we face brutal impacts, while there are simply not enough platforms for young generations to enact and change. So I think that was really important issue and something that we have to think about. So my question is, although you kind of mentioned it, what kind of regulatory support or what kind of any kind of support that should be quickly done by policymakers and those who are in power now?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Sue. So in the presentation, I mentioned two things that I think would be really critical. The first one is the redistribution of the resources in order to support youth projects and youth leadership. So I talked about that $16.4 billion, an absolutely massive figure that's being used to support the fossil fuel industries by the UK government. And bearing in mind, that's just one government, one of the largest nonetheless, but still only one. Even a fraction of that could be used to better promote youth leadership programs, youth initiatives, even some of the initiatives we've heard about here today could benefit greatly from that. The second point I'd like to make, and which I think would be incredibly useful, although perhaps not easy to implement or very fast in its implementation, would be the introduction of a Future Generations Accountability Council within government. And as Hong-jin mentioned earlier, particularly with the COP26 youth side of things in Milan, the things that we do as the youth and our representation isn't necessarily powerful and doesn't necessarily have agency accompanying it. So such a council would need to have the legislative powers or the legal powers to oversee the actions of the government and veto the parts that are definitely not in the interest of the future generations. I'll leave it there because we are short on time, but I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you very much for your insightful answer. So moving to Hong-jin, I know that you flew from Glasgow Climate Change Conference straight back to here to, obviously he had a COVID test, but which is negative, by the way, and straight back to here to share with us your experience. So thank you. And my question is, what was it like to be actually on site as one of the young generation, and what was most impressive for you, good impressive or bad impressive? And so tell us a bit more about the on-site experience for those who were not there.
Well, first of all, thank you for characterizing me as one of the young. Certainly I wasn't. we were, yeah, to begin with, we were just on our bus going to the event venue, and we saw a lot of youth, like proper youth, just out of the schools, elementary schools, secondary schools, and then the slightly older ones were the very active college kids, university activists, and then the young adults who just begun their career but nonetheless made the time to go to the streets in protest of the lack of leadership. And then there are people like me who actually have to make a living out of something, right? But yeah, across the different spectrum of youth, they're angry, like you can feel it, and that anger sometimes are channeled into some violent means, which I do not approve. But perhaps that's what they do because that's the only way to get the attention of the people who are backdoors making the negotiations that doesn't work or have not worked for at least since Copenhagen. So that's what, 12 years lost? And imagine, like Jack said, what we could have done, you know, like what we could have done with the fraction of the hundreds of billions of subsidies that went into coal to make this planet a mess, right? So you can definitely feel that anger more than the pictures that you see. And yeah, so if you have an opportunity, participate in the next pre-COP in, I don't know where that will be, but just you'll get the vibe. And then, as I mentioned before, one of the encouraging things was to know that there are so many angry youth. And what I really felt after, I wasn't actually in the conference room when Obama spoke, President Obama spoke, but obviously he's a great orator and he galvanized the youth. And he specifically said, stay angry, right? Okay, Mr. Obama, I have a word for you. We are angry, you stay angry, and let your peers be angry, right? Or else I don't think there will be angry people anymore in this planet. So I think that's my take on the COP. Thank you.
Thank you, Hong-jin. Because we have less than 3 minutes, I have to answer one of the question came up from the online participant. So for those audiences in the offline, if you have any questions, please privately chat with our panelists afterwards. So it's actually the common question. This question applies to all of you, but since the time constraint, I have to pick one of you, and that is 강호영 대표님께 여쭤보겠습니다.
And I would like to ask Mr. Kang to answer. This is an online question. So since you are a chairman of the board of one organization, I want you to answer this online question. As a young generation, what is the priority that you think? What is the priority task for young generation? That is one question from our online audience. Maybe you can make it brief for 1 minute, I guess. Thank you. The priority task that is needed. That was the question, right? And I think that encapsulates all of the presentations and the discussions we had in the session. Stay angry. That was the expression, right? I believe many older generation is aware of the issue, but after discussing the issue, and they just forget. When I have discussions with senior generation, I can see that they emphasize with me, but then some of my acquaintances casually throw away right in front of me. So people are turning blind eyes to problems. They just blindly assume that, oh, this might be a problem because everybody else is saying so. And they stop there. And they just casually think that, oh, these might be problems and do not act on them. As was pointed out repeatedly, we shouldn't stop at acknowledging the problems. We have to act on them. That would be my final message. Thank you.
이렇게
Climate change is not a problem that we can actually see. So we are aware of the problem, but it is oftentimes difficult to put our thoughts into action. So as a young generation, we have to make efforts, and maybe we have to demonstrate that we know this issue and we are acting on it.
So thank you so much for all of the panelists. And so from Jeju, from China, from the UK, we have had various viewpoints about the role of youth in response to climate crisis, and the over conclusion and the challenge ahead of us is that young generations are so important in this climate crisis era, one way or another, because not only because we are the most main stakeholders by the time we face the impact, but also because we have the most potential, especially we are living in a world that is digitally connected. So we have this potential and capacity that can be immeasurable because of the connection that we have. So thank you, panelists, for your valuable insights. So this will be the end of our session. Thank you all.